So people are joining. I would like to explain first what is International HR Talks about. International HR Talks is a format, a virtual format, and we are inviting keynote speakers, disruptive keynote speakers from all over the world to talk about HR, digital transformation, entrepreneurship, the new trends, what is really HR, what is it not, because today we are going to learn that HR is a little bit out that definition. And we will look for new words to define this position and this role, yes? Okay, and this is a format every 2-3 weeks. And so today, for me, it's an enormous honor to present Maja Stojanovic. Maja is Serbian, and Maja is going to be, can I say that? Next week, 40. She is really young. For me, she's extremely young, yeah. And I met Maja, she was my neighbor in Nuremberg. And then she moved some months ago to Munich to join the Siemens transformational department in Munich. And really, I'm missing a lot our inspirational talks, Maja. And with a glass of wine, I'm missing you a lot, really. And yes, Maja's background is Serbian, and she was raised up in Sweden. And she has a background in marketing and sales, so the same as me. And then she changed to more a role in HR and operational HR in Portugal. And then she was an agile coach in Germany. And now she joined the really big transformational project in a dinosaurus company as Siemens. Yeah, and we are really happy to learn today, how do you do that? And how do you see the future of HR and the future of work? And I would like to ask you something before starting, Maja. First of all, hello, and thank you for your time and interest and to participate. Yes. Maja, what do you think is the role of people in companies, in stakeholder management, in influencing the board of the companies? The role has improved during the pandemic, has stayed the same, or has gone down? What is your impression, first of all?
First of all, hi, and thanks for having me, Sylvia. It's good to see you. I miss you too, and especially the wine and dancing evenings.
Yeah. Right.
So my viewpoint, if we look from the COVID perspective, so during the pandemic, I would say that the role of HR really got more empowered, because companies realized that we need to care for people in matters like this. You can't just send them home and say, please work as previously, mostly because not all companies had technology that would support that home office. And also from the health and mental perspective, it was much more responsibility put on the companies to care for their people. So I would say that HR as a function in an organization, and especially people, are the key things for business. And I think this was really the time for businesses to realize how important that is. So I think we've been taking it for granted. Now it's been elevated to, we need to care for people.
Yes, totally right. Okay, Maja, it's all yours. We are listening and very curious of what you're telling us today.
Cool. Thank you, Sylvia, and happy to be here and present a bit of what we're doing at Siemens. I'm also going to give you a little bit of an overview, because I also want to start by mentioning that transformation is different from company to company. So everybody starts from different preconditions. And I think it's really important to look at what is there and what can be done. Mm-hmm. So let me share my screen. And let's see if it works from a sharing perspective. Mm-hmm. We get the right one. Cool. So I'm going to talk a bit about the glimpse of what's ahead. And I work a lot with agility. And as Sylvia mentioned, I was an agile coach in a sales team. I also try to implement and have been implementing a bit of agility in different HR functions. What we do in agility very often is, it's nice to be here, but are you mentally also here? So I want you to take 1 minute to just have a look at this picture. It's a sheep scale, and just figure out which number represents you at this very moment right here, right now. I would love to see in the chat if you can just put your numbers down, and we just see how you guys are doing. So before we go to the fun stuff, let's see how you're doing. Oh, always 9. That's very nice responses. Okay. It's a happy crowd. Very good. All are acceptable and fun. My personal favorite is number 3 because I think that's a really cool hairstyle, but not probably gonna get there soon. Very good. So now you probably are also mentally checked in. I'm going to start from a quite high level on about HR and what I see. This is probably not a new picture for many of you. We talk constantly about climate changes, sustainable use of resources. We talk about digitalization, which even got more increased during Corona and the pandemics, where we had to find solutions if they were not already there. And I can say before Sylvia moved to Nuremberg, before the pandemics, you couldn't pay by card in Nuremberg. But magically, pandemic came and all of a sudden a card was acceptable. So there is always hope, even though digitalization has not reached everywhere and everyone. We have urbanization and localization, which has also been slightly affected by the pandemics. We also see people moving out from the cities to the countryside, for example, to live a different type of life. And it's no longer really required that we moved to cities or even to countries to work, because a lot of work is actually also fully remotely. There's a study that we saw where about 64% in US actually preferred to work fully remotely. So they wouldn't even leave the States. If the time zone works, then the companies are also accepting that. The demographic change is going to be one of the big things in Europe, especially coming forward. So in Germany and general, in specific, by 2030, about 6 million people will retire. It's quite a significant loss in the workforce. And it is going to affect a lot about how we work, but also how companies are functioning. I'm going to get to that later. But it is a very, very strong factor moving forward for HR functions, but also business on how to actually get workforce in the future. So if we then look at, of course, the speed we are all in, if we look at technology, if we went from the first computers to where we are today, it has changed quite significantly. And we're talking more and more about artificial intelligence. There are these constant discussions about, is artificial intelligence taking over our work or people's work? The thing is, no matter what technology we have, we will always need people who can work with it. So if we will shift certain types of jobs from one place to another one, basically. And that's why there are discussions, for example, in certain countries to make it mandatory for kids to learn more about creativity and innovation rather than doing historical, 1932 this happened and so forth. So really to also speed up the educational piece. But whatever is happening in regards to technology, it's just really, really much faster than it has ever been. So what does that actually mean for all of us, and especially in businesses, but also HR? These impacts we have globally are also leading to new technologies. So the type of technologies that we use, for example, Zoom or Teams or whatever you might use that you haven't used before the pandemics. We also see a very fast movement in medical and health treatment innovation. So a lot of new stuff is coming up in a much faster speed. This also leads to that we're shifting business models. So if we're looking at businesses going from traditional industries like Siemens, for example, is quite big, industrial, heavy products. We're moving more and more towards pure technologies. And these shifts from hardware to software also signifies changes in the way we do business and the way we earn money. I was for a couple of years in the sales for cloud business, and just shifting from software licensing to cloud subscription is quite a big thing on how the business works and how it actually shifts the business model in forecasting, but also the way we have targets for our salespeople, how you actually make that money. And that then, of course, leads to the fact that it shifts the way of leadership. So producing gas turbines, like Siemens' most traditional form, which is now Siemens Energy, required quite a strong hierarchical traditional structure, whereas selling subscription, which is quite fast, it's not 5 to 10 year projects, it's maybe a 1 year subscription. You need to start picking up with the customer almost directly after the purchase, but also a couple of months before they want to renew. What's also interesting here is, in regards to leadership in general, something shifted during the pandemic. So in US, for example, about 4.3 million people left the workforce in January this year. And they continue leaving. Some are coming back, but there's also quite a bit of people who are not, who are either reskilling completely, so they're not working at all with what they did, or unfortunately, a lot of the people left were mothers who then went for home care for the kids because kids were in homeschooling. But interestingly enough, there's also studies showing that a lot of people also left because of toxic leadership. So this is quite new trends that are being seen where people just have had enough, was kind of what was coming out from these studies of, I'm not really enjoying this type of management, I'm going to leave. So there's quite a bit of things happening on the leadership perspective as well. And that, of course, also leads to new talent patterns. So pandemic increased the ability to work from home. So people like me who like to travel and live in different places can do so without actually having to leave my workplace or my function. However, it also shows that talents are much more considering whom they work for than the actual position they are in. So the purpose needs to fit the personal purpose. We see talents who are much more concerned on, I want my company that I work for to take responsibility on a social manner as well. So sustainability and consciousness, diversity, equity and inclusion is becoming more and more important, where talents are really looking into what am I getting when I get in. So it's not so much about reward anymore, about compensation and benefits. It's also about the softer pieces of what a new work actually leads to. So these things combined, then of course comes to an employee experience. So this means a lot in general for a business, a society, but it also means shifts from an experience as an employee. I want to have my personal purpose fit in. I want my company to take responsibilities for sustainability. We have, for example, the degree framework at Siemens, which is quite vast. I also want to work in new business models. So there's a lot of expectations here and changes also on the employee experience. So what we did was actually at Siemens last year in October, went from employing human resources to empowering people and the organization. So shifting these trends, and also how everything has developed from the industrial era to where we are at today, we can no longer actually look at a person as a resource. We need to look at a person as a holistic individual. And why is that? Back in the days, we would have machines and factories and things that would produce these big gas turbines, for example. And when you have a machine, it's a resource. You want to use that resource up to 100% capacity, because that's when you get your money back, you're productive, you're efficient, you can get your products out to your customers. You can't really use a human being 100% because they're human beings. And if you use a person 100% only for work, they will burn out. So looking at people more as individuals, you also increase the way of how you change cultures to make them belong, to make them feel belong in the culture, but also they're not a resource. There are people who are contributing to the success of a business. And as we're also leaving an industrial era, we can't really think in just machines and factories anymore. We have to think about how can we help people and create an environment where they feel good, so that they work well, but they're also creative and innovative. And by doing so, the organizations as such will start requiring some kind of resilience, because there's so many changes coming from the outside. And if you start treating people as people, you would see that we're so many different people on the planet. And that is actually a beauty in itself. And having that mix also creates some kind of resilience, because nothing is really static. And not being static means that we can become resilient in the way of how do we as people and individuals, as well as an organization, actually adjust to changes. And as you notice, they keep coming and they just increase and they come more and more often. So in a bigger term, I'm talking about traditional industrial heavy machineries and organizations where you have hierarchies, there are lines of managers, there are reporting lines, and the flow of information is usually not so fast. It comes from the top downwards, and then it has to flow downwards and upwards, and sometimes it gets filtered, sometimes it doesn't even arrive. If that is too slow for the speed that we see is happening on the market right now. So what we're also seeing here is looking at people as humans or individuals also leads to you become a little bit softer in the edges. They're not real like org boxes, but you become more and more round. And we need to start working more in ecosystems, as you see on the right hand side. And these ecosystems are there because, as I mentioned before, a lot of people have left the workforce in just US. A lot of people will leave in Germany in the future. And we also see shelf knowledge. So the knowledge you have today is going to expire in about 5 years. So we need to constantly relearn things. And by doing so, we will always have a bit of lack of workforce on the market. So you're not always able to find exactly the competence that you need at that time, which might lead that you borrow competences from different places. And in ecosystems, you can do so because these circles or ecosystems are more purpose-based. So you're working more towards a purpose, towards the customer, rather than this is my role, I'm making this part of a process. You're working more visionary towards a purpose. And to give an example for in an ecosystem, so cloud businesses work quite often in ecosystems because it's so new on the market. And not anyone knows really how to do it. You can sell and you can provide, but you can have one supplier who does a platform. You have another supplier, a partner who is creating the applications needed for your business. You might have a third partner who might actually help you with doing the change management that happens in a business once you bring cloud in, because it actually shifts the way you utilize the competence in, for example, machine usage, or the way your customer uses your machines. So a lot of data-driven aspects, where with data, you will know kind of what is the next step. And if you utilize ecosystem, you might also see then what is the resources or the partners that I need to actually move further. So this is just a quick overview of an ecosystem. As I mentioned, it has a specific value proposition. It's also very clearly defined. However, the group of actors might constantly change. So you come in for a certain time of period to create something, and then you might leave to another type of task or assignment. So there are different roles and relationships, but it always needs an orchestrator. So somebody needs to kind of be the Spider-Man in the spider web. However, what is really important here in comparison to a traditional hierarchy is everyone benefits sustainably more than comparing to if they would act alone. So together is, my favorite, for example, is sharing is caring. So this is a great example of that as a team, you can create something faster and much more of value on the market. So if we then look at what happens from an HR, or as we say, people and organizational perspective, from the left-hand side, you have the very traditional hierarchical organization where you manage, right? So leaders manage their teams, their team leads manage their teams, and so forth. It just drills down. In the era where we are right now, and where I would say also Siemens is at the moment, is in between 2 and 3. So a matrix organization where you might have dotted reporting lines. You report officially to somebody, but unofficially also to somebody else, depending on where you sit in the country. And here it's much more complex. So there might be global roles, but also regional roles. And then in those regional roles, you might have vertical expertise or vertical sales channels. So all of a sudden you start having a lot more different players on the ground. So here leadership would then be more about leading, because you can't really manage the complexity in the same way. And where I see we're heading towards is the more experimental one, where I mentioned just the ecosystem. There are, of course, other aspects or models as well, where you have holacracy, for example, you have fluid organizations. But what is becoming more obvious here is that from a leadership perspective, but also from P&O or HR work, we're coaching more, because we're starting to work more with individuals. We also look at where are the individuals at this very moment, and what can we do to actually help them to transition and move forward into these changes. And as you notice, the ecosystem circular design is also a little bit more harder to grasp. So it's also hard to manage that. Then you start controlling, and then it doesn't work in an ecosystem. Leading is also the traditional way, but if you coach is where you can actually allow for the organizational resilience, but also for people to start moving around. And you benefit from it, because we now, as I mentioned, shelf knowledge is getting shorter. So you want people to step out of from where they are at to gain new insights, new competencies, and then come back. So I also heard we're starting to talk about moving from hire to retire, moving from that to actually hire to rehire. And the shift here is then to be as attractive as possible, that people want to come back once they have left. So as you have noticed, we do live in times of fundamental accelerated change. It's quite interesting, and I'm quite happy to live at this very moment because I feel like there's huge shifts ongoing. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a recap then what is ahead of us. So a little summary of what I've been talking about. The main thing is we move from resources to people. We're being more appreciated as people, but also businesses care more because we are people. We're not just clocking in, clocking out. We're looking at it from a holistic viewpoint. So a full person, I want to belong, I want to bring my whole self to work. I want to actually feel a sense of belonging. And this is where diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, where that comes into place. And we see more and more companies working heavily on that. So really allowing for everyone at any stage being part of the company and feeling good about it. We talk a lot about in Siemens, in P&O, about resilience and relevance. And resilience is this ability to actually cope with change. So the well-being of myself needs to function so that I can be resilient. So when changes come, that I can quickly think, okay, what do I need to adjust? How do I do this? And how can I best support myself? But how can I also best contribute to my tasks and the business? The relevant piece comes from the quick changes requires also that we stay relevant on the market, meaning we need to continuously learn and unlearn, but we also need to continuously look at, we don't know what might be needed in 5 to 8 years. So being curious is a capability we were never ever asked to really develop that far, because you wanted to manage people and lead, and it's easier than when people don't ask too many questions. But to stay relevant is actually to be curious about what is out there that we don't know of. And here every business is in the same boat, is no one really knows. So we need to work on staying resilient so that we can actually figure out, okay, the next steps would be. And in relevance, I also want to mention this piece of hire to rehire is it's going to be much more movement on the market than ever before. And we can see it already now that it has started. So I can tell you that most people might think that the most wanted for job on the market to hire are software developers. But actually statistics says the most, the jobs we're looking most for, so the most sought for people on the market right now are recruiters. So Sylvia, you're in the right business. And this is because the movements have already started on the market. So people are, first of all, leaving where they don't feel they belong, or they don't really like their leadership, or they can't connect with the purpose of the company anymore. They start moving around. That's one piece. The other one is the competences needed are so fresh constantly that if you have a special skill, you will be headhunted quite frequently. So all these things are already giving a market that we are going to shift, and we're going to do so quite big. The next piece I spoke about is the speed. There is more and more agility being implemented in a lot of companies. And I see trends from my time in Siemens that there was a lot of training in agility about Scrum, we had Scrum certificates and so forth, but there was no real sense of urgency to actually implement it, right? But we got to a place where we have to, because we need to become way faster, because the lack of resources that we also have everywhere in the businesses, that you will lack one piece or the other. So we need to become faster as P&O and change the clock speed. So what do I mean with the clock speed? In most companies, you might have jour fixes, fixed dates where you just have a blocker, and then you do updates and you inform each other about something. And if you have time, you maybe pick up one challenge that you work with. What we have done with the leadership team of P&O globally is we changed the whole clock speed for them to fit the agile transformation that we're undergoing. So there's a set of very specific meetings with very specific purposes for each meetings. And they go from everything from 30 minutes every week, once a week, to 90 minutes every 6 weeks, and then 2 full days FaceTime meeting once a quarter. And there are really specific purposes of each of those meetings, so they have time to inform and update, but also have the possibility to work really on operational challenges or operational and strategical topics. The speed also, we notice, is the customer value has taken over from shareholder value. So we're looking much more into the customer rather than satisfying shareholders. And this is really not specific for Siemens. It's more obvious on when you go from startups and then onwards up. And this is where there's a study that says companies that only think about costs will die in 20 years. And this is because many big conglomerates are driven by shareholders, and shareholders, of course, like their bits and pieces of the cake. So we're constantly thinking and have been brought up to just think about reduce cost and be more efficient and effective. However, we also see there's a trend to really start investing more. So really bringing in more money and upskilling and reskilling of workforce, but also innovation and creativity comes into place. We'll look over adaptive organizations. So we have something in our team that we talk about eco over ego. So we talk about the benefit of the team rather than the benefit of each individual. And in ecosystems, for example, there's not much room for politics. So the purpose is the more important thing, and that drives teams towards delivery for the customers rather than political individual wishes or agendas. And this is also because we're forced to work in partnerships, also probably sometimes with competitors. And this is a very fine balance on how to do that. Collaboration is becoming increasingly higher. In Google in Munich, for example, they only allow home office once a month. And this was before the pandemics, and they're trying to come back to that. And the reason is because their teams were much faster and better in resolving problems when they were sitting together than when they were sitting separately in home offices. And that's despite any technological Teams meeting, Zoom, whatever you might have. So this is just on a face-to-face basis, but also collaboration across borders. So even internally in companies, in traditional ones, you have many times just functions just doing their things, and they just send over their piece when they're done. Right now, we have to start really integrating collaboration way more. And this is also where the talent exchange comes in. So the purpose of really moving around talent so that it can get a flavor of so many things in order to see where can you utilize the competencies best. And last but not least, is going from managing, leading to coaching. And also, when it comes to coaching, we did a quite big thing in Siemens, which was to take away the performance management. So we had something called the PMP, where you had once a year, you had a conversation with your manager about your targets, your set targets, how do you reach them, what is the evaluation on both ends, you close that down, you create new targets, you move forward. That is too slow for the environment we work in today, because everything is moving and changing so often. And we are now more looking into forward-looking ambition. So what can I do in the future, rather than what have I done really well or really bad in the last year. So we exchanged the PMP to something we called growth talks. And this is really where managers are then more and more coaching their teams and individuals or people to actually see what is the talent of the person I have in front of me, and how can I help that person to develop and grow further. So people-oriented, also over experts. What I also see are trends. And I think this one is going to take a little bit more time in bigger companies, but it also looks at, if we look at people above experts, you will always need experts. But what we have done traditionally is, when you have a really good doctor, what happens is that that doctor at some point becomes a director of a hospital. But the doctor is actually initially good in treating people and not doing administrative tasks, right? So how can we elaborate to give people or experts who are brilliant experts the same status as when they're heading a business unit or being a CEO or a CFO of a team? So that is the question that I see is coming more and more up right now. So I'm coming towards the end, and I always like to make people reflect. I don't know how many we are, but in agility, we would do a retrospective. I think you can do one for yourself. These are 3 questions I usually bring with me when I have a presentation or a workshop. What did I learn? What do I take with me? And what will I change? And that goes from wherever you are and whatever you do. Those questions are always valid. So I think, Sylvia, we can then move to questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Maja. As always, it was fantastic. Your way of presenting is very easy to follow and very logical, and at the same time, it brings new ideas to your mind meanwhile you're talking. Yeah, so it was really great.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who wants to start with a question? Please raise up your hand. Maybe I do so. Meanwhile, other people are starting.
We can also get in the chat, right? There's a hand up, I see.
Oh, yeah, there's a hand up. Sorry, I didn't see it. Okay. So talk to them, please.
I can't see who it is.
No, neither do I. Eva, can you do it, please?
I can see Fred. No, Fred was the first who would like to ask a question.
Okay, Fred, go ahead.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for that lovely presentation. It's refreshing to see that the company as important as Siemens has already recognized this issue and is moving forward on it, and you're part of the vanguard of this charge. So that's fantastic. So my question is this: essentially, it's a structural change. You're moving away from a bureaucratic kind of structure into something that's more organic in terms of your ecosystem. So what are the challenges that you faced in terms of having to shift gear? And what are your favorite strategies that you personally have used to overcome some of these challenges?
All right, very good questions. I think the structure is the one that most people who are in change management want to direct at, which is also the hardest one to actually accomplish. And we're a company of 300,000 people, so we would need some kind of structure to actually manage that. I would give 2 examples. One would be what we have done since January with this new clock speed and agile transformation is that we have 5 agile pilots running. And having those 5 agile pilots, they are staffed from different places of the organization. So it's on a voluntary basis. The product owner is known. This staffing or the constitution of these only 5 teams have already raised questions if the structure we work in actually works. So we didn't bring those discussions up. They come up when you start poking the bear. What is difficult though is in Europe, you have workers' council, there's a lot of negotiation, it has a lot of impact. So it's not always so easy to actually change the structures as we would wish we want to. So the second piece I want to give, which is also something I personally tried, is how can you start creating an environment where people want to collaborate with other teams? May it be out of interest, curiosity, or just by personal choice, just reaching out to random people for networking sometimes leads to these discussions of, oh, I might need your help on something. You can create ecosystems without them actually being on a piece of paper. That's the cool thing about ecosystem. I hope that satisfies your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think you being a practitioner on the ground, it's good to hear how you have encountered these challenges and overcome them. I think we've all seen our fair share of this kind of change management issues. And one of the things that isn't so well articulated, and I think it's important, is actually the mindset of the people that are involved, and which really talks about values and belief systems. And sometimes that needs to shift first before we can apply skills and knowledge. Do you find it true in your own experience?
Yeah, so Siemens actually also shifted priorities as a strategy. So the strategic priorities are not so, how should I put it, technical anymore. They're actually 4 strategic priorities. One of them is growth mindset. How do you create that? How can we work with that? The second one is empowerment, because within ecosystems and such, you would need to empower people to actually change things, instead of somebody telling them you need to change, but also empowerment to, go look for new horizons or new business clients or new business models. The third one is customer impact, and the fourth one is technology with purpose. So we're also seeing that strategic priorities for our end are also shifting into more people-oriented priorities. And I think that's one start to give the tone from the top that now it's really time to look at the mindset and not just change and shift people to trainings, have them to have the certificate and then come back and do the same thing they did before.
Thank you, Maja.
Fantastic, thank you.
There is a question in the chat from our friend Ainhoa Fornos. She's asking, hello, I'm currently implementing 100 future-oriented managerial bonuses. Have you done it in Siemens?
No, we have not yet, but there are teams investigating into this on how to do that. Because as I mentioned before, sales is one of those places where you traditionally have bonuses depending on the targets and quotas you have. How do you work with that if you're then changing into also maybe having targets as how collaborative are you, or how much have you worked in an ecosystem or partnership? So I believe those things are coming, but it would be nice to hear from Ainhoa one day how that is going on her end.
Ainhoa, can you answer, maybe? Comment? I think it's okay for her, your answer. Okay, good. I have a question too, Maja. You said that Google Munich is asking people to come back. In fact, in Silicon Valley, the offices are empty of Apple and Google, because people are now working from Miami and from the Bahamas. You know that, yes?
Yeah.
And what can you do with your staff to come back?
I think it comes back to the culture piece, to be honest, because working from a nice beach somewhere is always nice, but you notice when you meet face-to-face with people that you can resolve things much faster, you create new things much easier, and it's less frustration ongoing. You have less emails, you have less Teams chats, So the benefits of at least coming together once in a while is higher than being fully remotely. So Siemens has a policy now, which is a hybrid model, where every individual can choose when they work from home and when they work in the office. So it's a mix of, we want you to come back, but it's also on your terms when in the week or so to do that.
Mhm. Great.
I have one
Walter,
question.
yeah, Walter, I saw you before. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Maja. It was a great presentation, and a lot of questions, but a focus on one. But let me start with congratulating you of getting rid of the annual performance appraisal. I think that has been one of the biggest wastes of manpower and talent in big organizations for decades.
Yes.
So you done very, very well. Now I pick one thing out of the things you asked, or you showed the image of the ecosystem, and towards the end you also highlighted the question: how can we make experts? How can we offer experts, what shall I say, a career that they want, where they have the same status and the same opportunities without going into a leadership role. Now, here's my question. When you look at the orchestrator, the playmaker in the middle of an ecosystem, what do you see as their core strength, as their core competence?
That's a fairly easy one. It's a people person. So the orchestrator I see in the ecosystem is one who is much more people-oriented and is quite high in emotional intelligence, in seeing where people have potential, and also keeping track of being a good communicator, because they also need to keep track of what's going on around in this whole ecosystem and kind of connect the bits and pieces. And the difference I see there with experts is that experts have an expertise in one certain topic. So you're focused much more on a detailed topic, where I see orchestrators are really generalists with a great vast of really good people skills.
I want to keep discipline here. No further question. I would just like to add, from experience with talking to one of my clients, and they are in the SaaS world as well. I hear from them, they don't. I agree with you. The playmaker needs to be a people person. They need to have a high social, emotional intelligence. But what I learned from this client is they say we also need, I call them helicopter experts, experts who are not expert in one field, but who are quite intelligent people, quite universal geniuses with a good people ability, because you need people who understand the complexity, what's going on there, and who are the people with the strength that we need in a certain project.
Yeah, and this is what I meant, like somebody with the ability to connect bits and pieces, right? Connecting the dots. And I think what's shifted there, because connecting the dots was the buzzword a couple of years back in HR, is the fact of being able to really look on a whole helicopter view, but also being able to deep dive into details. So somebody who can connect the two worlds with that has been disconnected for quite some time, I would say. So I agree with you. Thank you.
Any question from the audience? So I ask another one. Tell us, please, other definitions for HR. How can you define an HR director, VP, HR? Tell us other names you like.
What I have heard that is out there is people officer. There are also new type of roles popping up. Sweden, which is my home country, is quite good in that. I've seen what was the name? A person who had the role of a happiness officer. So really, it's always experimental in smaller companies, right, where you can do those things, but it really comes from the fact of creating cultures and thinking from the people perspective. But I think people and culture, people and organization officers coming more and more common. And for me, that fits quite well because it's people in organizations.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Marta, sure you have a question.
There was also one in the chat.
Marta Kuni.
Oh.
Okay, Marta.
But I don't really have any question because Maja did an excellent presentation. I already attended to this presentation, but I wanted to repeat it because there was so many information and so good input. And what I really like it's how to move from manage to lead and to coach. No? And we were talking some years ago about the leader coach. So what's the new name of the leader right now? Just coach, or is there something different?
I think it's too early to say, to be honest, because we're just in the shift. We actually live in all three scenarios still in society. So I think we would need to figure that out. It's the same thing as Sylvia asked, what's the new words for people, VP, HR directors? It's the same thing. I think what really matters is people will actually start recommending their leaders or coaches. And this will be one attraction thing for talents in the future. So for example, in Net Promoter Scores or so forth, we always ask, would you recommend a company for somebody? I think in the future, we would even have questions of, would I recommend my own leader to work with? So I don't know what the future word would be, but for me, it's coming more from the titles going into what is the impact that the people are actually doing, or these leaders or coaches.
And are you thinking, just my last question, are you thinking to remove the titles of the positions in Siemens, or?
I think we won't, because that would be quite a big task. And I'm also back to, does it really shift mindsets? Or can we actually work with the mindsets rather than the titles as such? Because the titles are just titles. They give a certain type of status. But if we're able to be successful, and that goes for any company in the future, is what impact can we actually create, and what environment do we have which actually makes people wanting to stay or wanting to join?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, Maja, the big challenge we are having ahead is to create brand awareness and visibility of people departments, because still a lot of people in organizations think that people management is people administration, HR administration. They don't see us as a strategic leader doing an impact in the boards. And there are still some companies where HR is not on the board. And this is really a big mistake. Yeah. And we did studies in our female HR forum, and we saw that the position really has not increased after the pandemic. During the pandemic, yes, because we were necessary more than ever for the C-levels, but now not a lot has changed really. And so it depends on us, on the HR people, to make this impact and to be more assertive, and it's absolutely necessary to be on the boards and to take strategic decisions. Yeah. In a lot of companies where D&I and women have to be in management positions, most of people think, they put all the women in HR over there, not to fulfill the quote.
Yes, yeah. Actually, they're in communications, they see a lot of shifts where actually people strategy is becoming way more important than the business strategy. So I think we're yet to see that change. That's not reached yet everywhere, but the trends on the market is really pushing towards that. So I think it's definitely coming. And you're right that it is still an unbalanced quota of women in HR versus women in business roles or women as CEOs. And this is where I meant where talent attraction is going to become very important, where talents will look for, does this company I am about to join actually have female leaders? Because that gives a sign for me as a woman, for example, if I can grow. And if I don't see anyone, then I might also be reluctant to say no. And talents have the luxury of doing that today.
Yeah. I know I was mentioning that the new CEO of Chanel is coming from HR. Yeah. And so, but it's an exception. Yeah. But yeah, maybe a milestone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is so interesting. Any more questions left for the session for today? Yeah? No?
Hi, we have a question.
Yes, Adriana, go on.
We would like to know if you have any experience in Latin American countries with these ecosystem challenges.
Where are you from, Adriana?
Colombia.
Okay, thank you for joining.
Nice. Personally, I would have to think from a sales perspective. When I was in cloud, I can say definitely yes, because the businesses are also adapting to the markets. So when I was in cloud business, Brazil was the harbor for most Latin American companies. So sales kind of went through there, and you need to involve a lot of people, different people in different countries to get solutions to the customer. So I would assume, based on that experience, that also from a people perspective, that HR was also collaborating in a sense of, do we see trends that we need to start attracting or recruiting more people in one country or the other, which can be coordinated from, in our case, then Brazil.
Yeah. Okay. Dear Maja, sharing is caring. I felt that you cared for our community today. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and all your inputs. And I'm really happy to have had you with us. Really, thank you a lot. And yeah, see you the next time. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Sylvia.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Dancing the Kuduro.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Have a good
Bye,
day.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Bye.
so much. Bye-bye.